Hello, beautiful community. This is going to be a more contextualizing and grounding and alarming and emotional rather than analytical chat about the prospects of US democracy to decline or even collapse. One of the most frustrating things about... I'm lying. One of the top 20 most frustrating things about my illness, it's not a top 10 thing, is that I get so many exceptional correspondences and I don't have the capacity to respond to them or respond to them in a timely way. And I've got an absolutely excellent letter here from Greg, which I think represents how some of you might feel, and that's why I want to read a small section of it and then respond and maybe even challenge the letter. And it's going to take us to the heart of how we think about what on earth is happening with Trump's attack on US counter-majoritarian institutions and US democratic culture. I'm sorry, but you're getting this wrong is the title of Greg's message. I very much appreciate the work you're doing by your dedication to it. I've learned a lot, but I'm growing more and more concerned that you don't really know what's going on here in the United States. I defer to your greater understanding of long-term erosion of our liberal values to populists and right-wingers of various kinds, but you vastly understate the speed and depth of collapse of the American experiment. If you can, please review this Ezra Klein podcast that gives an excellent discussion of the various forces at hand. And then you go on to mention some of this. You mention Doge, you mention Project 2025, you mention Trump, and you say that I'm certain that Trump is the threat most likely to destroy American democracy in the next 2 years or less, rather than it happening as a result of some nebulous geopolitical trend that will play out over a longer period of time. We are not drifting out of the bay into open, choppy waters, Vlad. We are in the middle of a soft coup, and we don't know how to fend it off. Democrats, institutionalists, and I believe you are being painfully slow at realizing the scope and completeness of this coup. I beg you to prove me wrong. And by the way, as an American, I take responsibility for the damage RFK has done to our medical research. I fear this will negatively affect your future treatments, but I promise to do all I can to correct the situation, and I'm not alone. Best of luck and lots of love back. So I can't share the full letter with you for reasons of just honoring our time, but I think it's an exceptional letter, and I'm privileged to get so many exceptional letters. What Greg is trying to do is basically say, look, Vlad, my judgment about your views is better than your judgment about America. And I think that's an implausible enterprise, but it's possible. So let's explore this. Now, I've just received this email a few minutes ago. I've just opened it a few minutes ago. And I think that what's going on here is enormously valuable for all of us to talk about. And I'm going to be a little bit blunt, but it's not going to be because I want to be mean to you, Greg. I don't want to be mean to you, and you can tell that I don't want to be mean to you. I'm grateful to you. But I'm going to be a little bit blunt with us, to go a little bit like this with us, because some of us still need it about the moment, the historical moment that you're in. So let's start with a few remarks here and there. But first, let's sort of capture what you're saying. You're saying that, Vlad, we're not coming out of the bay because we have a soft coup and an attack on US state capacity that's systematic, very dangerous, is not meeting enough opposition. So wake up, Vlad. What you've written, Greg, is quite Fukuyamian. In these 3 pages, you've described what looking out of the boat, being on the boat, is like when it's coming out of the bay. And then you've said it's so bumpy that this can't possibly be us coming out of the bay. This must be some kind of devilish storm in the middle of the ocean. It isn't. You've written me 3 pages about what coming out of the bay looks like. Our historical context is changing rapidly. We're in a new, irreversibly new historical age. Right? And I still get many messages saying, Vlad, we can't ever really know what's going to happen 5 years from now. Democracy could start flourishing again. And that's a misunderstanding of the social forces at work here. I'm going to put my cards down a bit. And I haven't thought about this enough. I don't know if that's really the source of my visual analogy. But it probably has something to do with it. As you know, I lived in Tonga for a bit, 20 years ago. And once I was well enough to sit in a little cafeteria, probably the only cafeteria on the island group, a northern island group in Tonga called Vava'u. And a red boat that was making either an 18 or a 27-hour journey to another island group was just coming out of the bay and heading toward open water through a few channels with islands on the side. And at that point, an acquaintance of mine swam out toward that boat and waved to a friend on the boat and got attacked by a tiger shark and didn't survive, was alive for 10-15 minutes. And when I saw her 2 hours later, she still had the color in her cheeks, but a missing leg. This was a brutally contingent tragedy for a kid, Peace Corps kid. And it was a constellation of terribly unlucky factors, like it was dusk, sharks like following boats, fresh water met salt water there. There was a very deep channel there, even though it was not far from the shore. And there was a known congregation of tiger shark activity there. And tiger shark attacks are spectacularly rare in that part of the world because the sharks are so well fed. So I sometimes talk about things that can sound soft, but they have a tragic element. I often talk about dances, but in some dances, right, the dances can get torn to shreds, literarily and mythologically. When I talk about the boat coming out of the bay, I'm talking about democracy being in crisis. I'm not talking about it being like the bay, but a bit less convenient. I'm talking about a new age with historical risk, which you're describing. And you've described yourself as a constitutional Republican who's just beside themselves rightly, right, with what's happened to your party. You talk about Ezra, right? And Ezra, with Derek Thompson, has written this new book called Abundance, and you point me to the Doge podcast that Ezra did, which I haven't yet had a chance to watch. Now, in the book, Ezra and Derek paint a picture. This is not going to be a big detour. Paint a picture of a rejuvenation of state capacity, away from regulatory obfuscation toward building, growth, various kinds of state liberatory action and market liberatory action. Now, one of the questions is, of course, will there be enough state capacity in the United States post-Trump for such a project to be entertained? And the second question is the critique of neoliberalism, which the boys offer, not itself a bit neoliberal, and therefore not sufficiently removed itself from some of the causes of what's landed us here? Does it not treat consumerism too much as an end in itself, as opposed to something that needs to be thought of together with an image of the good life on a collective political scale, tied to a certain image of human self-realization? Is there enough prospect of participation in the innovation that the boys talk about by many rather than few citizens? To cut it short, is the kind of brilliant project that they offer a project that goes far enough to alleviate the two emotional problems we face, that too many people feel like they are victims, not participants in the economy, and too many people feel that they can't touch politics and can't inflect its direction at all? Unless you change these two feelings, wherever you are in the West, you're going to be a coin toss away from losing your democracy in the next decade and a half. So, and what's marvelous about Ezra and Derek is that they have a capacity to look at the big picture while also having an extraordinary facility to be on top of some key policy issues in real detail. They're offering a constructive project, and I've just offered sort of an implied criticism of it, which Samuel Moyn tried to offer too in the New York Times, but his essay was correct, but very badly written in my view, to the point that I read my own point in it, but I couldn't quite understand it. But it's still an excellent piece, it's just awkwardly written. So it's written in such a way that most people reading it wouldn't quite understand what criticism exactly he is making of Abundance, the book. So I am probably more skeptical than Ezra Klein about the prospects of reversing this mess, right? I have to confess, if I'm not its equal, but it's certainly not the case that Ezra is more pessimistic than me. And you talk, Greg, and you see how I'm doing this to us now, how Trump could destroy US democracy in the next couple of years rather than some nebulous geopolitical trends doing it. They're not nebulous, Greg. They're driven by real social forces. And an early onset expression of them is Trump. And you've written me 3 pages about how not nebulous Trump is. Well, if you think Trump is, if one were to think that Trump is nebulous, and I know you don't, one would need to put that in the context of later and worse things to come. You say maybe worse things won't come. Maybe Trump is the thing to destroy it. But Trump ain't nebulous. What's going to follow Trump ain't nebulous. It's going to be a more determined and more effective project in all likelihood that assaults US institutions. We're in a new historical moment. We have to be aware that we're going to be dependent on 2 things: the resilience of institutions and our capacity, a la Ezra or a la Ezra plus some criticism of Ezra, offer new political projects. Unless we offer new political projects and unless our institutions hold out, right, we're going to have not societal collapse, but democratic collapse. So you've written me an eloquent letter describing exactly what coming out of the Bay in historical terms looks like. And in a way, you've written me a Fukuyamian letter, because it's still a kind of Fukuyamian fantasy of deliverance from real history to say, oh my God, this is so bad, this can't be coming out of the Bay. But you can't assume that coming out of the Bay is going to be like the Bay, but just a bit less nice. No, it's a different historical moment where things are on the line. There is genuine existential democratic risk involved. And we're going to be moving from buffoons attacking our democracy, the combination of a few strategic actors there too, and buffoon-free, much more determined and much less theatrical projects doing this in the 2030s. And resisting Trump now is actually about building muscles for resisting the more scary stuff that's going to come later. But I don't want to deny that Trump is scary. Part of the reason that we keep coming back to this room and talking about it is that it's so difficult to process that historical transition we're going through, because it's challenging, because it challenges things we've taken for granted, because it's not nice, because it involves risk, because it suggests to us that things might evaporate which we've taken for granted. So that's my response. My response, Greg, isn't that you're wrong in your description of the situation, but that you've described what it means for me to come out of the Bay. But you have ascribed the Fukuyamian twang to it, which makes you think that if it's that bumpy, it can't be coming out of the Bay. It must be some devilish storm in the middle of the ocean. And I understand there's a lot of physiological shock a lot of us are going to feel over the next 18, 24 months. It's less shock or no shock for people who put where we're at in the context of all historical time rather than just recent history. But something else that this kind of radical historical change does, it warps our sense of time, it warps our sense of perspective, because it's shocking and overwhelming and intimidating, and things that are not meant to be happening are happening all the time. So it's difficult to calibrate ourselves here. And it's interesting that you've been watching me more or less try to articulate what you've articulated, and then you've articulated it back to me and said that's proof that it can't be what you say it is, when we're talking about the same thing in a way, but you wanted to give it a different label because of that Fukuyamian twang, right? That attachment to the Bay which we've left. Whose responsibility is it? Let's chop this up. It's 100% my responsibility when I'm misunderstood, right? So it's not because it's your responsibility that I've gone like this. I've gone like this because it's important for us to not over panic, but to also wake up and realize that, our new normal contains a lot of not normal things by the standards of recent history, but we're going to be here to process this all together. Lots of love. And just one final thing, beautiful community. What gives me real pleasure at kind of a physical level is not when, a bigger wave of people write in and say, oh, Vlad, I agree with 80% of what you say. What gives me a wonderful kind of physical glow is when you move. Not where I want you to move, but when you move somewhere that is about you, that is about where it's right for you to go. That's what this is all about. So I think it's an important addendum minification to add to this video.